2 Snapchat accounts, both completely empty. On a day he was recording everything, a phone that everyone agreed needed forensic examination, that sat untouched. For 6 weeks. 6 weeks, a 30-minute GPS gap, where the boat just stopped, parked at El Camino Road, and the person driving that boat has never explained why. An independent autopsy that came back undetermined, not accidental, not homicidal, undetermined, because the pathologist could not examine the lungs, could not examine the airway. Part of the throat had already been removed. A state autopsy that is done, completed, sealed, going straight to a grand jury that the family cannot enter. No toxicology released, no charges filed. Several of the friends on that island trip have quietly lawyered up, and a $125,000 reward is sitting there, unclaimed. This is where we are, and today we are going inside every single one of those cracks. Stay with me. News Nation spoke with retired FBI agent Kieran Ramsey, who said investigators may be able to recover several layers of data from the 18-year-old Snapchat account, even if information was deleted. Several layers. Pause on that. Because most people think that when something is deleted from Snapchat, it is gone. That is not how digital forensics works. According to digital forensic experts, you can look at all the text messages and the software will even tell you which ones were deleted. Things deleted at some point in time are still there and can potentially be recovered if the data has not been overwritten by new data. The key phrase there is if it has not been overwritten. That is the race that has been happening behind the scenes. Every day that passes, every action taken on a device or on a server potentially overwrites the data investigators are looking for. That is why the family moved fast. That is why they filed subpoenas. The family of Nolan Wells issued court subpoenas to several major technology companies in an effort to recover digital evidence they believe could help explain his final hours. The subpoenas seek records from Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, Life360, WhatsApp, and other platforms Wells used before he disappeared. And this is important. The move comes as investigators continue examining the circumstances surrounding his death, with key questions still unanswered. The family's legal action shifts the focus from Wells's cell phone itself to the cloud-based data that could reveal messages, location history, photos, videos, or other digital activity that may no longer be stored on the device. That distinction matters enormously. Even if something was wiped from the phone, Snapchat servers may still hold a record of it. And that is what the FBI, in coordination with the subpoenas, is now working to extract. The FBI is helping examine digital evidence in the investigation. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed this to local outlet Locks, so the FBI is in, officially, and their specific role as described by the sheriff is digital evidence, not crowd control, not general support, digital evidence. Which brings us to the question this video is really asking. What did they find? Here is where we have to be honest with you and disciplined about what we know versus what we are speculating. As of right now, the recovered Snapchat data has not been made public. What has been confirmed is that the FBI has been working the forensic examination of digital evidence. What former agents have said on record is that the data is likely recoverable. And what the family's legal team has confirmed is that the subpoenas have gone out and are within their response window. Retired FBI agent Kieran Ramsey said he believes his former employer has likely already sent out what he called tons of preservation letters and said authorities can follow it up with grand jury subpoenas if need be. Here is the investigative thesis for today. The question is not simply whether Nolan Wells drowned. The question is whether the digital record of his final hours on Horn Island has been fully preserved, properly examined, and honestly shared with the people who have the legal authority to act on it. Right now, only one of those three things appears to be happening, and we are going to show you exactly which one. But first, the autopsy situation, because this is the other half of this title, Cause of Death Revealed. And what was actually revealed is something far more unsettling than a clear answer. A private autopsy preliminarily found that Nolan Wells' cause and manner of death are undetermined pending investigation, with the independent pathologist acknowledging multiple limitations in the report, as announced by family attorney Ben Crump. Undetermined, not accidental, not homicidal, not natural, undetermined. That is a specific forensic conclusion. And it means something. It means the pathologist looked at this body and could not say, with the available evidence, what killed him. Let that sit. The report said, the most significant of the limitations was the inability to directly observe the airway and lungs for water and directly observe the stomach for gastric contents. Notice this. If you are trying to determine whether someone drowned, the two most important things to examine are the airway and lungs for signs of water inhalation and the stomach for gastric contents. And the independent pathologist could not examine either because of what was found, or rather, what was not found when the body arrived for the second autopsy. The preliminary report for the private autopsy observed that during the initial autopsy in Mississippi, part of the throat was removed. Now, before we go further, doctors who spoke to ABC News were clear. It is not uncommon for pathologists to remove an organ or tissue to examine deeper inside the body. If a second autopsy is requested, there may be a delay in the ability to examine the removed tissue. Factors like this can make secondary autopsies more difficult to conduct than the primary. So the removal of that tissue is not automatically sinister. That is standard pathology. What is not standard is the combination of factors here. A body that was, according to Ben Crump, not in a state that would allow a complete forensic review of the remains. A removed portion of the throat that the independent pathologist could not examine, and a toxicology report that was not even included in the independent findings. The independent autopsy did not include a toxicology report. So we have no confirmed cause of death, no toxicology, and the state autopsy, which was conducted first and may have answered some of these questions, is sealed. The results of the autopsy conducted by the State Medical Examiner's Office in Mississippi have not been made public. Once the investigation is complete, the case materials, including the autopsy report, will be presented to a grand jury, which will decide whether what happened to Wells involved a crime. A grand jury. That is the next gate. And grand juries are not public. They are not live streamed. They are closed proceedings where evidence is presented to a panel of citizens who then decide whether there is probable cause to believe a crime occurred. The family will not be in that room. The press will not be in that room. Ben Crump will not be in that room. And whatever the state autopsy says will remain sealed until the grand jury either acts or does not act. That is how this works. And it is important to understand that because a lot of the frustration you are seeing from this family, from civil rights leaders, from the Congressional Black Caucus, stems directly from this information gap. The official system is moving, but it is moving behind closed doors, and the family is on the outside of every closed door. The doctor who performed the independent autopsy said in the report that he could not rule out foul play. Ben Crump also revealed that the independent autopsy found red discoloration on the back of Nolan Wells' head. Red discoloration on the back of the head. The independent pathologist noted it. He did not classify it. He did not say it was caused by impact or by post-mortem changes in the water. He noted it, and he said he could not rule out non-accidental factors. The report said both injury to the neck and non-accidental factors contributing to Wells's death cannot be ruled out. Cannot be ruled out. That is not the same as evidence of injury. That is the language of an incomplete picture, and it is important to hold both of those things at once. The independent pathologist is not saying Nolan Wells was killed. He is saying, based on what I was able to examine, I cannot confirm how he died, and I cannot eliminate the possibility that something beyond an accident played a role. That is a very different statement than a cause of death. Now, here is where the GPS data becomes critical. Because we have two sets of information that need to overlap. We have a body and we have a boat. And the boat's movements on July 4th tell a story that has not been fully explained by anyone on record. According to GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the vessel left Horn Island at 4:31 in the afternoon. It returned to its original departure dock. It then traveled into Fort Bayou around 5:52 in the evening before returning to the dock at 6:06. And later that evening, the boat went to the Fort Bayou boat launch at 7:19. That sequence of movements has been documented. It is part of the official record. But there is a window inside that sequence, a roughly 30-minute period, during which the boat sat stationary at a location on El Camino Road for approximately 30 minutes, and Warren's own recorded account, the account given to investigators, does not address that window. Think about what that means. The GPS data exists, it has been recovered, it is part of the case file. Records included reports from July 4th, July 5th, and July 8th, focused on the initial involvement, the search for Nolan, drone usage, transfer of the case, the call to CETO, and the collection of GPS data from boats related to the case. And yet no public account explains that specific stationary gap. 30 minutes, parked, unaddressed, in a case where a young man who was left on an island was found dead 2 days later. That gap is not a rumor, it is in the data. And it has not been explained. Wansley previously said when Nolan's phone was returned to her, they found no pictures or videos on his 2 Snapchat accounts, calling it suspicious and leading her to believe that something was removed from his phone. One of Wells's friends said he had no knowledge that anything was deleted during the July 4th trip, saying there was no reason for anybody to get to his phone. No one even was in contact with his phone until it was moved from the boat to the truck, and none of us have access to Nolan's password to get on his phone and delete anything, the friend said. So, we have 2 competing accounts of what happened to the phone. The family says it was wiped. The friend says no one touched it. The FBI is now the only entity positioned to resolve that contradiction. Because the truth is not in what anyone says. The truth is in what Snapchat's servers recorded, and in what the FBI's forensic examination of the device reveals. Whether the data was deleted from the phone is one question. Whether the data still exists on Snapchat's servers is a completely different question. And right now, only one of those is being actively investigated with the tools powerful enough to answer it. When a body is found in the water and there is a suspicion of drowning, it is important to confirm how that person entered the water, the independent pathologist wrote. This information is especially important for those deaths of persons who can swim, as is the case with Nolan Wells. He could swim. That detail is in the autopsy report. The independent pathologist flagged it specifically. Because drowning is not a simple diagnosis when the person in the water was a strong athlete who knew how to swim. And it becomes even more complicated when you cannot examine the airway and lungs for water. Drowning is one of the most challenging diagnoses in forensic pathology because there is no single autopsy finding that proves it, according to forensic experts. No single finding that proves it, which means proving it is not a drowning is equally difficult, and that is the position the independent pathologist found himself in. Looking at a body with incomplete information, missing tissue, no toxicology, and a set of findings that would not let him draw a firm conclusion in either direction. This is where we are sitting right now. Somewhere between an official narrative that leans toward accident and a family that refuses to accept that conclusion without complete evidence. And in between those 2 positions, there is a locked state autopsy, a sealed Snapchat record, a 30-minute GPS gap that no one has explained, and an FBI forensic examination that is still active. The question we are sitting with today is this. If the FBI has now recovered data from Nolan Wells's ghost Snapchat accounts, what does it actually show? Does it corroborate the friend's account that nothing unusual happened that day? Or does it show something that changes what we think we know about July 4th on Horn Island? We do not have that answer yet. But the people who do have it are inside a grand jury process that is not required to tell us anything until they are ready to act. And that gap between what investigators know and what the public can see is exactly where this family has been living since July 6th. We are going to stay in that gap with them. And we are going to keep going. Now, here is where we need to bring in someone who actually knows what this forensic process looks like from the inside. Because the public conversation around this case has moved very fast, and a lot of what people are saying online is not anchored in how digital forensics actually works. Retired FBI agent Kieran Ramsey laid out the process plainly. He said law enforcement goes after the data directly, and the first move is a preservation letter, a legally binding document sent to the social media company, forcing them to freeze the user's server data immediately. That is step one. Freeze it. Stop any automated deletion. Stop any overwriting. Because deleting a message on your screen does not wipe it from existence. It simply removes the local pathway to that file on your specific device. The actual data often sits on the company's server until it is overwritten. Step two is the subpoena, which is what the family's legal team has already filed. The subpoenas request all IP addresses tied to friend events on the account, information that identifies any party messaging in a conversation with the account, all posts, stories, chats, messages, and direct messages, all photos, video recordings, GPS data, friend list history, and other stored information. Read that list again slowly. IP addresses, GPS data, friend list history, every single thing that Snapchat's servers recorded about that account on July 4th. Not just what was visible on the phone, everything the platform recorded on its end. That is not a fishing expedition. That is a precision request, and it tells you that whoever is advising this family legally knows exactly what they are looking for. But here is the critical variable that no one is talking about enough. How much can be retrieved also depends on when the phone was last synced to the cloud. And if the phone continued to have a cellular signal or connected to Wi-Fi and that data synced up to the cloud, investigators may run into a data destruction period. Think about what that means. Every time that phone connected to Wi-Fi or got a cell signal after July 4th, there is a possibility that new data began writing over old data, automatically, without anyone choosing for that to happen. That is how these devices work. And that is why the more time that goes on, the less likely these items can be recovered. So the question underneath all of this is not just, did someone delete the Snapchat? The question is, when did the phone connect to a network after it came back from Horn Island, and what happened to the data in that window? That is a question only the forensic examination of the device can answer. And right now, that examination has been held up. The family and prosecutors agreed weeks ago that the phone warranted forensic examination, but both sides say they want it examined while disagreeing about how that should happen. Weeks. They agreed weeks ago. And the phone still had not received the jointly planned forensic examination as of the most recent reporting. Nearly 6 weeks after Nolan Wells disappeared from Horn Island on July 4th, the device still had not received the jointly contemplated forensic examination. 6 weeks, a phone that everyone agrees should be examined. And it was not examined yet. Notice this. That is not a family dispute. That is not a legal maneuver. That is a procedural failure in a case where time is the enemy of the data. Whether the delay was caused by a disagreement over who controls the examination, or how it is conducted, or what protocols govern it, does not matter as much as what the delay costs. Every day that phone is not in a forensic lab is a day closer to permanent data loss. And the people who would benefit most from that data never being recovered are the very people whose accounts of July 4th have not been fully challenged by any digital record. That is not an accusation, that is the shape of the situation. Now, the Congressional Black Caucus. Because what they did is not just political theater, it is a legal mechanism, and it is important to understand what they actually asked for and why. The Congressional Black Caucus is urging the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI to launch an independent federal review into the disappearance and death of Nolan Wells. The CBC sent a letter on August 12th to Attorney General Todd Blanche and FBI Director Kash Patel requesting a federal assessment of the case and asking for a written response within 7 days. 7 days. They put a response deadline in the letter. That is not a courtesy request. That is a political pressure mechanism, and lawmakers said federal involvement would not interfere with the state investigation, but could determine whether civil rights laws were implicated. That phrase, whether civil rights laws were implicated, that is the legal language for a very specific question. Not just did someone commit a crime, but did someone commit a crime that targeted Nolan Wells because of who he was, because of his race, In a state with a documented history of racial violence and a documented pattern of cases where black victims were classified as accidental deaths without full investigation. Chair of the caucus, Representative Yvette Clarke of New York, wrote that the scant information from local investigators had her and other members of the caucus concerned. The caucus urged the FBI and Department of Justice to examine the case to ensure that every appropriate resource, investigative tool, and avenue of inquiry is being used to establish the truth. The lack of answers thus far continues to fuel speculation and grief, Clarke wrote. Speculation and grief, those two things are feeding each other right now. And when the official record has this many sealed doors and unanswered questions, that is what happens. People fill the silence with theories. Some of those theories are reasonable. Some of them are dangerous. The district attorney's office has issued a public warning. The DA said, "I caution the public about assigning trustworthiness to things they read and see online." That is a real warning, because misinformation in a case like this does not just circulate on social media. It contaminates the witness pool. It puts pressure on people who may have legitimate information, and it gives those who want this case to go away a reason to discredit every legitimate question by lumping it in with the conspiracy theories. The family themselves have not pushed theories. They have pushed for process. And that is a distinction that matters. The family has repeatedly said they are not accusing any specific person. They want investigators to determine whether digital evidence was deleted, altered, or remains stored on company servers. That is a responsible, specific, legal ask, not a mob verdict, a forensic one. And Ben Crump has been consistent. He said, "We stand for truth no matter who it implicates or who it exonerates. We stand for justice no matter who it convicts or who it acquits." Now pay off something planted early in this video. Remember the independent pathologist flagging that Nolan Wells could swim. That detail is sitting inside a much larger forensic argument that has not been made clearly enough in public coverage. While currents around Horn Island can be dangerous even for experienced swimmers, Crump has disputed the theory that Nolan accidentally drowned, saying he was a strong athlete and swimmer. Here is why the swimming ability matters forensically, not emotionally. If someone drowns accidentally, the cause is typically confirmed by the presence of water in the lungs, diatoms in the bloodstream, foam in the airway, gastric water ingestion. These are the markers that tell a pathologist a drowning occurred. And the private autopsy found the cause and manner of death undetermined pending investigation, with the pathologist acknowledging multiple limitations. Those limitations included not being able to examine the airway and lungs, which are the precise structures that would confirm or contradict a drowning finding. So the independent pathologist could not confirm drowning, could not confirm foul play, could not rule either out. And the state autopsy, which was conducted first and had access to the full body before tissue was removed for examination, is sealed. The state autopsy report is sealed, pending review by a grand jury. The results of the state's toxicology tests, which are standard in death investigations and can take weeks, are also completed, but those findings have not been made public. The toxicology is done, the state autopsy is done, and neither has been released. They will go before a grand jury. Attorney Eric Hertz told NPR he believes the case could go before a grand jury in just under 30 days. 30 days. That is the next gate. And everything that happens between now and that grand jury presentation matters enormously. The Snapchat data, the phone examination, the IP records, the GPS data, the 30-minute stationary window. All of it goes into that room. All of it will be seen by a panel of citizens who will decide one thing: is there probable cause to believe a crime occurred? The DA's office has said convening a grand jury does not mean there is any criminality and is standard procedure for most unnatural or suspicious deaths in the county. That is important to say plainly. A grand jury presentation is not a trial. It is not a conviction. It is not even a charge. It is a question. And the question is whether there is enough evidence to take the next step. The public will not know what the grand jury sees. The public will only know what the grand jury decides. And that is where this family is living right now, waiting for a decision made in a room they cannot enter. about a son whose cause of death has not been publicly explained, whose phone has not been jointly examined, whose Snapchat accounts came back empty on a day he was documenting his life. Christine and Elmore Wansley said they have waited more than a month for basic information and still do not know what happened to their son. Elmore Wansley said, "We just want the truth. We are asking the questions any other parent would ask. No one has been charged in Wells' death." No one has been charged. Say that again. No charges, no suspect named publicly, no official explanation for the 30-minute GPS gap, no cause of death confirmed by any source that is publicly available, and a phone that sat unexamined for over 6 weeks while both sides disagreed about process. Several of Wells's friends have retained high-profile lawyers in case of wrongful death suits and to potentially file defamation suits. Think about what that means. The friends have lawyers, not one friend, several, lawyering up simultaneously for wrongful death suits and defamation suits. That is not people who are comfortable with where this is heading. That is people who understand that what happens in the next 30 days could change their lives, whether they have something to hide or whether they are protecting themselves from a wave of online accusations that have been unfair to them, we cannot say. Both possibilities exist, and right now, no public evidence answers that question conclusively. The phone may reveal nothing that changes investigators' understanding of Nolan's death, or it may help answer questions his family has been asking since July 4th. That is the most honest sentence anyone has written about this case. Both outcomes are possible, and neither can be dismissed. Here is what we know with certainty. A state autopsy was completed and sealed. An independent autopsy returned inconclusive. A 30-minute GPS gap has not been explained. A phone agreed to need forensic examination sat unexamined for weeks. A family filed subpoenas to 6 technology companies. The FBI is active on digital evidence. A grand jury is 30 days away, and a reward of $125,000 is sitting unclaimed. A $125,000 reward remains available for information that advances the investigation. That reward exists. It has existed, and no one has come forward to claim it. In a case where a group of young people were on an island together and only one did not come home. Now, here is the part of this video that is hardest to report, because we are not at the end of this story. We are somewhere in the middle of it, and the middle of an active investigation looks like this: incomplete records, sealed documents, disagreements about process, national pressure that may accelerate or may distort the outcome, a family holding a question that no official source has answered. Questions about Wells's disappearance and death on Horn Island remain unanswered nearly a month after he was found dead off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. Investigators have completed the state's autopsy. Prosecutors are preparing to present evidence to a grand jury. Attorneys on both sides are positioning for possible civil litigation, and state officials are warning the public about fake documents circulating online. That is the state of play. And inside all of that machinery, there is a family. Not a narrative, not a political symbol. A mother and a father who drove to Atlanta to stand at a podium because no one in their state had given them a real answer. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a community college football player, a kid who used 2 Snapchat accounts because that is what 18-year-olds do, a kid his mother described as someone who documented everything, who shared his days, who left a digital trail that should have answered the most basic question of this case: what happened in those final hours? And that trail is what the FBI now holds. In some form, in some state of recovery. What it shows, and whether it is intact enough to show anything at all, is the question that the next 30 days will begin to answer. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump has maintained that the Wells family is seeking truth, transparency, and accountability while the investigation remains active. That is what this family has asked for from the beginning, not a predetermined verdict, not a name attached to blame before the evidence is examined. Truth, transparency, accountability. 3 words that require the same thing: a complete record, honestly reviewed, by people with the power to act on what they find. Whether this grand jury process delivers that is the question we cannot answer today, but we will be here when it does. The question we opened with today has not changed. If the FBI has recovered data from those Snapchat accounts, what does it show? And if it shows nothing, why does a kid who documented everything leave no record of the last hours of his life? Sit with that. We will keep following this case until there are real answers. Every development, every court filing, every piece of this record that becomes public, we will be here. Now that you have heard everything we covered today, from the sealed autopsy to the GPS gap to the 6-week delay on that phone examination, what stands out to you most? Leave it in the comments, because this community sees things, and in a case this active, more eyes matter.